Thanks everybody for hanging in there until the end of the day. We have a very exciting panel here to talk about various innovations from finance to technological solutions for scaling clean energy. My name is Justin Guay. I'm the Associate Director for the International Climate Program at the Sierra Club. And my fellow panelists here are Christina Becker-Burke, who is a Senior Consultant for Meister Consulting Group, and Nikki Armacost, who's the Managing Director of ARC Finance. And so they will be my co-conspirators today in discussing this really important topic, which is scaling clean energy and addressing energy poverty, as well as displacing diesel in rural agricultural applications. So I want to give everybody a sense of the flow for the discussion today. I will turn it over to my co-panelists to kind of frame the discussion for the next hour, hour and a half. After they are done setting the context, we will show the videos of the successful participants in the challenge, and then we will turn it back over to our panelists to basically give their thoughts on each of these individual submissions and in accordance with their experience in their various fields. And then we'll turn it over to the winners to basically respond to the thoughts, questions, interest from the panel, and then we'll open it up to you guys for any questions you might have. So before I turn it over to my friends and colleagues here, I just wanted to say that, from my perspective at the Sierra Club, our international program spends a lot of time advocating for reform of international energy lending flows. And the goal is obviously to transition existing grid-based systems from fossil fuels to clean energy, but it's also to create new systems that support energy poverty alleviation and that actually create clean energy as a tool for development rather than as a barrier. And so I think it's really exciting to see some of these solutions and innovations that we're talking about today and see how they can be applied to both of those challenges. So I will go ahead and turn it over to my colleagues to help frame the discussion. The one thing I would say too, though, is in my work, what I've seen over and over again is that there's really two overarching challenges to deploying technology and really scaling clean energy. The first is business and financial model innovation. There's a lot of really interesting technology. It's very difficult to deploy that in the real world. So I'm looking forward to hearing what both of my colleagues have to say about taking these great ideas and actually making them work in the real world. And the second is access to finance. It's very difficult to get scalable finance once you have a workable business model and an innovative technology. And many of the institutions who have been geared to supporting these kinds of technologies in the developing world and other parts of the world are either too risk averse or are waiting to see a bit more scale before they jump in. So it'll be interesting to see or hear from our colleagues what they think around those two important issues. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Christina for her thoughts on that.
Sure. Thank you. All right. So can all of you hear me okay? So, I think all three of the projects that we will be watching videos on shortly certainly have very, very interesting projects. Interestingly, we have one example that we'll be covering focusing on crowdfunding and two others that are the types of projects that could be possible recipients of crowdfunding. And, because as Justin highlighted, sort of scale is such a challenge for most financiers. They want to invest in projects that are a lot of international financiers want to invest in projects that are, 100 million and upwards, and then you have the micro lending for the really small projects, but there's that gap in between which oftentimes doesn't get financing, and so crowdfunding is interesting because it can fill that gap, and it can also bring new players into the field as well. I think, though, as for these projects and in general, when you look to scale up renewable energy, it's really critical to think about how to create there's three main aspects, really. How do you create an enabling environment for investment? And, the policy, that's really the domain of policymakers to, through a form of incentives, workforce training, and different types of, different types of factors, sort of stable markets, credit rankings, and there's so many elements that create an enabling environment for investment, but that's really one key element. And then additionally, and which I'm looking forward to discussing a bit further, is the role that sort of technical assistance plays. So all of these models, all of these concepts are, obviously in their earliest stages, but how is it that we get them from plan to actually self-sustaining business model? And that's an area where technical assistance is usually often required, and where I'd wonder, how is it that you're going to differentiate the models compared to others so that they are financially self-sustaining, as well as once they're implemented, how is it that you're going to engage the workforce and draw from them where the skills are, and then also develop some of the skills that are really necessary to grow the economy and increase uptake in renewables.
Great. Mm-hmm. Fantastic. And I think the third thing that you were going to say was finance. And I was hoping that that's what you were doing. And so, one of the big challenges that energy enterprises have in the developing world is access to finance, and particularly access to finance in the form that they need it, which tends to be, certainly at the early stages of an enterprise, relatively a small amount of money with relatively flexible terms, and with investors who are really willing to take a risk and who are willing to put their money behind an idea and a great set of potential leaders of the institution. Normally, there isn't a lot of money that's been put into prototyping at these early stages, and so the companies face this, what's known as the valley of death. So after you've hit up your friends and family and they won't talk to you anymore, and before any big investor is willing to give you money, there is this gap, which is called the valley of death, typically. And those who survive call it the valley of death, and those who don't survive are dead. So they don't really talk about that experience. But crowdfunding has such an interesting and important role to play in that space in particular, where what you can do is you can source funding from a very, very diverse, very large group of people who are passionate about a particular idea. And what crowdfunding can do is it can channel people's interest. It can create sort of little highways along which people who are of a similar mindset can choose to invest. So we're going to, Conrad's going to talk to us a little bit later about his idea, which is clearly focused on the idea of clean energy, channeling all those people who are interested in financing clean energy, but it could equally be education, it could equally be other areas that people are passionate about. And what these crowdfunding platforms can do is give a relatively small amount of money, sometimes very tiny amounts of money if it's going directly to an individual user on the receiving side, or smaller amounts of money to a business of some kind, a business that's a little bit further up the value chain. And it can give the money on pretty flexible terms, not a lot of conditionalities necessarily associated with it, allowing that enterprise really to grow and to use that funding to leverage much larger amounts of funding from more traditional sources later on. So I consider it to be quite disruptive in a very positive sense, very innovative, and pretty exciting potentially as a way to jumpstart some of these ideas that are a little bit cutting edge and that are maybe not so mainstream, and maybe in some places even considered very controversial, like, for example, climate finance. For those of us who are in the field, it's considered something that we all want to support, but there are people around the world who don't feel that way. So crowdfunding is a way to kind of pull together all of those people who are interested in that idea. There are some disadvantages to crowdfunding, and maybe we'll end up talking about some of those later on. Part of the problem, if you're on the receiving end, is that it comes in a lumpy way, okay? And what I mean by that is if you are, say, a microfinance organization that wants to put $50,000 into green energy, if you're waiting for $100 here and $200 here and $300 here, it can make it difficult for you to actually deliver a program. So some of the more interesting and innovative crowdfunders are finding ways to manage that kind of lumpiness of the receiving of the money. Sometimes it's not always clear, looking at the crowdfunding platforms, whether the appropriate amount of due diligence has been done on the receiving side. If it's going directly to an individual, it's hard for you as an investor to know whether that business is viable or not. And so that issue of whether due diligence has been performed becomes a consideration that has to be at least thought through, both by the crowdfunding platforms as well as by you as an individual who's taking the risk of putting that money in. And if you are on the receiving side, and I think we're going to come into this maybe in some of the discussions, it's hard sometimes to attract the money to you. We know, my organization has actually supported a number of crowdfunders as well as institutions that are associated with crowdfunders. And for some of those institutions, it's really difficult because you're in the crowd to say, hey, I'm here, I have this great idea, send your money to me. You're a little bit invisible in the crowd. So what is the strategy that you need to deploy if you want to be the one that of all the people that the money is given to out there, that it comes to you specifically? So these are some of the questions that I think are interesting questions for us to consider, particularly as we look at these very, very interesting projects. And congratulations to all of you for reaching this stage. They're all really interesting ideas. So back to you, Justin.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you both. So at this point, we will turn it over to actually watch the videos, but I just wanted to quickly go over the three winning participants. We have the crowdfunding platform from Crowd to Base. We have a new innovative micro hydro technology from Gaia Power Group. And then we have a Treadle Pump project proposed by IDEI. So we will watch each of those videos right now.
A river is a magical, moving, living part of the earth. The power of water has been used to produce energy since ancient times. However, today, rivers contain trillions of megawatts of unutilized potential energy globally. Hydropower is conventionally generated through hydroelectric dams, pump storage, and run-the-river systems. The are limited to a few locations and generally cause natural ecosystem damage and community displacement. Imagine harnessing the power of river water without these disadvantages. The Fish River project will consist of 100 stations, each producing 4.5 megawatts, totaling 450 megawatts. At each station, a weir wall diverts the river water into an open channel staircase system. The combined forces of the kinetic, forward flow, and gravitational potential energy of the falling water is used to power the turbine, which generates electrical power. Gaia Power's patented Stream Dragon system is simple and excellent in energy generation and extraction. The same river water is used repeatedly, station after station, making it energy and water efficient. Our river run system is unique because it is cost-effective, quick to install, low maintenance, and accommodates varying water flow volumes and speeds. It is environmentally friendly, as the river flow is never blocked, zero waste is produced, and air and water quality are not affected. Gaia Power's approach will change the way hydropower is generated globally. For us, small is beautiful, and repetition bountiful. The Fish River project will reduce greenhouse gases by 1.9 million tons per annum. It can plug into either a closed system or national grid.
Our approach fundamentally differs from any other hydroelectric system developed so far, while being able to deliver power at 5 unit cents per kilowatt hour. This is a first for a renewable energy company in South Africa.
We require $4 million for phase 1 of the Fish River project. to harness river power, first in South Africa and then in the rest of the world. Join us in powering economies, homes, jobs, and lives by generously contributing to this sector.
Just imagine 1.5 billion no access to internet. Enjoy the electricity generated from clean renewable energy. Without proposal to mobilize for challenge microgrids to people with a basic purpose, we want to make small this. This explains why we call our focus from crowd to the base. Now, get to know the team behind the proposal. This is Diane Lane from Antigua and Barbuda, very active in climate finance, including the chair of the Standing Committee on Finance. And my name is Conrad von Britt. Let me now explain what we mean by crowdfunding. Imagine this family at their microfinance institution asking for a loan of $300,000 to purchase a sewing machine and a solar light. Right? That microfinance institution then uploads this on an internet site, a crowdfunding platform, in this case kiva.org, where the crowd, people like myself or you, can actually see it on the internet. And one enough people are together for the loan of $375, then the local microfinance institution actually discloses to the family, who will then pay back over an agreed period of time. In this case, the monthly interest will be crowdfunding. And the family is left with the source of income and the source of life. We are proposing now to massively scale up crowdfunding climate change through three means. First, to set up a portal which independently calculates crowdfunding platforms and forms. It's very important to have transparency when we are requesting money creating. Secondly, the guarantee fund to encourage crowdfunding platforms to engage in this new field of renewable energy and to base up the pyramid by assuming some of the risks and losses of giving this new partners and clients. Finally, to mainstream crowdfunding for climate change by making it easy and effective for regular folks to crowdfund. For example, by setting up a crowdfunding account at their regular bank, which might even pay monthly payments. Now, Diane and myself have written a paper which explains in more details the ideas behind this proposal. And we are grateful to the European Capacity Building Initiative for their support.
Today, we are changing the lives of farmers in the world, bringing in the power to grow crops with little water. Our goal by the year 2020 is to ensure 5 million smallholder farm families adopt clean technologies and are able to earn a net additional annual income of US $400.
International Development Enterprises India (IDEI) is a not-for-profit organization committed to working with smallholder farmers in India by promoting sustainable for innovation by smallholder farmers. Use the use of diesel pump for innovation and thereby helps the farmers save money to spend on mining as well as on repairing fuel costs. Each treadle pump prevents half a ton carbon dioxide emission annually as it replaces diesel. In addition, IBM has deployed robots to train, develop the quality control, and promote the treadle pump technology in the villages amongst the farmers. It has also built the capacities of the installers on the village-based business, not only install but also provide service after sales to the farmers who have adopted the technology. Due to several limitations, IBM has been able to reach out to only a limited number of villages in India, and there is so much potential that remains untapped. In response, it has been decided to develop a toolkit that can help IBI replicate its model in more areas in a much shorter span of time. To achieve this goal, IBI has submitted this proposal to private rollout contest. Under the proposal, we have decided to develop a toolkit through which we will develop the capacities of these identified local entrepreneurs. The toolkit will be further improved based on the learnings derived from this pilot. I'm pleased to share with you the success story of one of our user farmers who has switched from using a higher diesel pump to treadle pump.
Today, we will meet Farm and his 7-year-old family. Farm says that his half-hectare land was in a sad state. This was something he and his family accepted like a bitter pill. He borrowed money to hire a diesel pump to irrigate his land. This was his big hope, and he was beautiful riding on its turning successful. But even step with diesel meant money down the drain was reluctantly attended a payoff. It was on a meeting he attended with a lot of reluctance that turned his life around, he says. Deep-headed, he saw that the green cover was slowly creeping in. On the open market, it fetched a good price. Prosperity led him to buy cattle. Education was now a possibility, inspired by his daughters. Started all for him.
The Fish River, South Africa. Here is where Gaia Power plans to make.
All right, well, that was great. We're having technical difficulties. Great. Well, thank you so much. So you guys can see the range of projects and applications we have on this panel, which is very interesting. And lots to discuss here. So I wanted to turn it over to Christina, going back to the ideas or the discussion around business models and the need to really define your target market in order to successfully deploy. I'd be really interested to hear what you think about both the Treadle Pump project as well as the microhydro project, and kind of your thoughts from your experience and how to support the deployment of those technologies.
Sure. Well, I'll begin with the Treadle Pump. So in general, I really think it is a very interesting project. It's a low-cost, simple-to-construct technology that addresses the really critical challenge of productivity and can really, as the example showed, support poverty alleviation. Now, the pitch that was included really focused on providing a toolkit. The question is, what is a toolkit for? And online, the toolkit emphasized being a toolkit that would be deployed for sort of to scale up their model. So for the business sales side of the manufacturing, the distribution, supply chain models, things like that. And I think that's a critical component, but I also think that the toolkit could probably be split into two parts. Also, one for how to the sales channels and how to sell it, but also how a user book of how it can be used, appropriate use, troubleshooting, simple things so that they can repair it themselves, I think are really critical. What's unclear to me is how, from this pitch, and I recognize that I only had 3 minutes to make the video, but how is it going to be profitable? What are the goals? Is this meant to be something which is subsidized by a USAID or another developing agency to that will lower the cost to make treadle pumps more accessible? That is a clear model that some organizations take. Or is this something that is meant to be sold as a profit? Is it also something that could be community owned? Is it I'm not sure if the treadle pumps are very mobile. If they are, given the size of some of these small plots, perhaps they could be shared within a community and moved around. And then, is it similarly if they can be moved around? Maybe they could be rented as well. So I think there are certainly a lot of different, certainly several open questions, and then several different ways in which funding these projects could be funded as a buyer, but also through the distribution. Do you want to speak to this a little bit more before we move on to the next one?
Why don't we move on to the next one, and then we'll give these guys an opportunity to respond.
And then we can continue a conversation. Yeah, sure.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you want to cover Peter's as well.
Sure. So with regards to the hydropower project, similarly to the other one, both the Treadle Pump and your project, they could be funded through crowdfunding, which is exciting. Your project has higher sort of capital investments than the other, certainly. But that being said, it's unclear to me sort of how will you manage things such as like energy theft, grid transmission losses. How do those factor into your plan? And some of those questions could potentially be worked into your pitch. I would also wonder what types of models you're looking to pursue, of whether it would be community-owned power as well, or whether small businesses could invest in them, and in the hydro plants and use that for their own business and then interconnect to the grid for excess power or not. And I would also think, the hydro projects have really a potential to create a lot of jobs, new jobs, as well as sort of leverage those in the communities where they're working. And I would wonder how you would engage the community so that they're able to productively support some of the projects, the construction needs, as well as the general ongoing care. Additionally, the communities that live upstream are going to want to make sure that they're maintaining the stream in a way in which they're not going to, divert most of the river and then, make your hydro plant no longer filled with water, things like that. So several questions that I have regarding sort of community acceptance, training, as well as from the business perspective of how you're going to, how you envision your revenue streams working.
Excellent. Thanks, Christina. So those are some very good clarifying questions. I'll turn it over to Peter if you want to respond and kind of give some more clarity on yours. And then also I believe we have Shweta available online. So we'll go Peter and then Shweta.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the opportunity of being here and some very insightful questions there. One of the things I think I just need to start off with just to say just how effective is the power output of this. Perhaps can I do that? Okay. Now, if you take something and you let it fall, just where I come from, we all talk about meters, and you guys talk about feet here. So forgive me on that. But if we take 1/10 of a meter, which is about 6 or 9 inches, and you drop that, it falls at a rate of 1.4 meters per second. Whereas if you take the same object and you drop it from a meter down there, it falls at the rate of 4.4 seconds by the time it reaches the bottom there. So the thing is that if you can take this and drop it like that, and you drop water like that in steps going down, then it is that by the time you get to the meter at the bottom, that the water is flowing at a rate of 14 meters per second. Now, 14 meters per second as opposed to 4.4 meters per second, if you work it backwards and say, well, how high does water have to fall in order to get to 14 meters per second? The answer to that is 10 meters. Okay, so it's got to fall 10 meters down. So in other words, is that from a meter fall in these 0.1 of a meter's falls in that we can generate almost 10 times the amount of speed of water. Okay, so that really puts a big difference on things, and that also means is that if you look at every single river or largely stream, all of them create opportunities where it is that you can put a weir across the stream or the river, anywhere between 1.5 meters up to 3 meters, 5 meters in height. Now 3 meters is roughly about where it says replacing diesel, maybe a bit lower, where it says winners. There in height. So that would be the height of the water that we would dam, and then from there we'd flow through a series of steps, as you saw on the video. Now what happens is that you go down on these steps, and you go down and you're down, but then there comes a point where it's optimum to put in a turbine. There, and then you put in that one, and then it flows from there into the next one, and so on and so on. Now in the process of it flowing from one turbine into the other, is that the excess energy that comes out of one turbine is then absorbed into the next. So it becomes a very good energy efficiency generation system. Which now brings me across onto the financial side of things. Because this is so efficient, and the power generation of it is so much more than standard, is that the infrastructural cost that actually supports this is so much less than standard hydro. And in some of the studies that were done back home, there was a hydroelectric system just recently installed, producing 10 megawatts of power, and it cost 1.4 billion. Whereas on our system, we can generate 15 megawatts of power for about 140 billion rand, which is about $14 million. You can see the cost structure difference. It's huge. Now this creates a wonderful business opportunity, not only for ourselves, but it is that we want to use this methodology to make it available to a lot of people who want to run their own little business, park somewhere next to a river, and so on, and monitor the whole business, and then feed it perhaps into the grid or into the local community, and have a good life. And for that, we'll charge a small royalty on it. What were the other questions that you?
I think that's a good overview, and we can come back to it.
Yeah. Okay.
We'll give Shweta an opportunity now to respond.
All right.
Shweta, are you there? Shweta, are you there?
Hello.
We can hear you.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Actually, I'm Jay Kumar. Shweta could not join because she's not well today, and I work with her, so I can answer the questions that were asked about the Treadle Pump program, because I work on the same project. I really like the suggestion regarding the toolkit, that we can make it into two parts, one for the user and one for the people involved in deployment sales. There was this question about profitability of the business model. So in our case, we are a not-for-profit, and till now we have focused on mobilizing grants and financing mechanisms like carbon credits to support the project, because the market for treadle pumps is very fragmented, and the margin on each treadle pump cannot be very high because of the low purchasing power of the end user. So therefore we have not been able to make it into a profitable venture. But one of the ways in which it can be profitable is that if the manufacturing, sales, and the management of the project, or the entity which is involved in the production and sales, is local. So it can be on a smaller scale, like on a district level, small manufacturer manufactures the pump, and then the local distributors and sales agents, they sell the treadle pumps. So we are trying that model, and therefore we are developing this toolkit, so that using the toolkit we can create many such entrepreneurs at local levels or even at the community level. And our role would be more of a facilitator, where we would be involved in capacity building of the people who will be manufacturing the treadle pumps, who would be selling the treadle pumps, and then also creating awareness about the treadle pump among the smallholder farmers. Then there is a certain role in facilitation, which is of enabling financing, because sometimes it is one of the reasons why smallholder farmers go for renting of diesel pump is because it is easier for them to pay small amounts for the rent of the diesel pump rather than pay a larger amount to buy a treadle pump. So there is a opportunity in creating some kind of a financing mechanism. Mostly in we have tried microfinance, but it has not been so successful, because even in microfinance there is a an average loan size of above $100, $200, around $200. Whereas for the treadle pump we need less than $50, $30, $40 of financing. So these are few of the challenges which are limiting creation of profitable enterprises around treadle pump technology. Also, there is a need to improve the technology from time to time based on the feedback we receive from the farmers. So there is a need for financing on that aspect also, R&D and technology improvement. These are the issues that I think are.
Great, thank you so much, Jay. So I think those were very helpful for helping us clarify business models and deployment. The one thing that strikes me when Jay was speaking was the need for consumer finance, the need for pay-as-you-go types of solutions to overcoming those upfront cost barriers. And I think that's a good transition to Conrad, and I want to turn it over to Nikki first to kind of talk about how the need for finance and what she saw in that proposal.
Yeah, what I want to lead in with is actually a couple of observations on the other two, and then lead into Conrad, because I think there's a really nice flow. What we ended up seeing were two quite interesting ideas that could benefit from crowdfunding because of either lack of access to capital or because it's an interesting idea. And so I think the question that companies like yours, and maybe yours, in fact, specifically would want to ask is, how do you select the crowdfunding platform? Which is the right crowdfunding platform for you in order to be able to generate the kind of money that you want? So that's a question to you, but it's going to lead us to Conrad. And then the other question is, and so let's say you've chosen the ideal crowdfunding platform, you've done your due diligence, or Conrad's platform has actually helped you do your due diligence. How then do you market yourself so that individuals over here in the US or in the UK or in India or other places actually think you're an interesting company? How do you stand out in the crowd of crowdfunding? So, you know, that's another thought that you need to have out there. And then the third question is really, what role does crowdfunding play in terms of the total volume of money that you see that you need? So, for example, if crowdfunding is the icing on the cake, it's the thing that's going to get you some extra small thing that's on the side, that's one specific need. But if crowdfunding is the thing that's going to fund the entire enterprise, then you're very dependent on the vagaries of the crowd, so to speak, for that money. And how are you going to manage that from a business point of view? And so, and this leads to the questions for Conrad. What Conrad is offering through his his platform and through his sort of tripartite proposal is a very interesting mechanism for companies exactly like yours, and also for financing entities that are interested in this space, because what he's offering is a kind of a neutral platform which provides information on the world out there that is crowdfunding for sustainable solutions. And so my question to Conrad is really, is it as simple as that? Is it just an information platform that you're offering? Or are you offering information plus? Are you offering, for example, an information platform where you list all of the crowdfunding institutions and the terms that they offer in a purely informational sense? Are you adding an opinion about it? Are you rating them in some way? Are you saying this one's better for this and this one's less good for this? Are you providing a commercial exchange where people can link to that platform through your site and you're able to show your value to the crowdfunders through the amount of traffic you're able to bring? Are you in effect creating a network of crowdfunders? They're all part of your platform where you can use that network to do advocacy, for example, on the part of crowdfunders. And so, so really, you presented a very high-level idea, which I think is very rich and has so many potential kind of manifestations of the business plan, if you like. And I would love to hear more, and maybe it's premature and maybe you need to think through some of these things, but I would love to know what the business model is specifically beyond pure information, and whether your view is that this is a public good you're providing, and so therefore it makes much more sense as a not-for-profit type of platform and preserves your neutrality, if you like, from that point of view, or whether you see this as a for-profit entity where you can generate funding through the traffic that comes through, which way you're going. So that's one set of questions for you. And why don't we deal with those first, and then I think the other 2 points that are part of your platform are also very interesting, also in different ways. So let me throw that out to you, Conrad.
Thank you very much, Nicola. Thank you for being the representative of the crowd here. And let me start out, because trying to listen to my own voice, I had actually difficulties to fully understand it. So pardon for the homemade video there. And let me just go quickly back to the big idea, what's really the motivation behind it. And the motivation behind is that I see business potential, ideas where investment can give a return in developing countries, which are investments which are good for the households or good for the community in terms of providing access to energy, savings, etc., and which in addition have a positive benefit for the globe, which I call the global co-benefit. And where there is the technology already developed, and we know how it works and what the impact is, but there's a little, and I call it a stupid problem, which is a stupid because we know the answer to it, which is people don't have access to financing to purchase the energy efficient light bulbs, which within half a year or year would leave them better off. And so this is really an effort to get at this, what I call stupid and simple problem, because there are many big problems which we are not solving with this. And so let's not fool ourselves. This is not an solve everything. But now, what would it take to get that financing into those hands? And so we know microfinance is developed and there are bankings, etc. And I just saw crowdfunding, and I think you worded it very well, as an interesting new and additional source of financing, which is more risk tolerant, or can be more risk tolerant, and can fill some of the gaps which currently are not being served. So if this is our starting point, then let's see what are the barriers to massively scaling up the crowdfunding, which we know, the Kiva, the Sun Funders, etc., and just let those financing streams go. And I see several level risks. One risk is for the funders, for the people like you who might be potential crowdfunders. What concerns you before you entrust your money? And this is not a donation. We are not talking about donation. We're talking about crowdfunding, either debt or equity, so that you feel it goes for a good purpose and it comes back. And then I see a risk at the level of the crowdfunding platforms moving in a field of clean energy. And certainly there are risks at the level of those microfinance institutions or businesses working on the ground because there are technology risk, new clients, etc. So for this first risk of you as a funder going to a crowdfunding platform, that is where the idea of the portal comes up. And I believe in a way you were very nice, because I think you laid out the different functions of this portal, and I would see them in a sequence. I think we start simple, so that you know, and we need to spread the word, if you're interested in crowdfunding for climate change, here's a portal where you have a good overview, all the legitimate crowdfunding platforms. You will find information, what's their purpose. They have very different products. Do they pay an interest or not? Do they work directly with microfinance institutions? Work they directly with businesses? What do you get out as a funder? Is it in zero interest? Do they pay some return? Impact points, etc. So it can be quite confusing if you're not in that field, and that should be providing an overview. But I think that's not enough. You also want to see how did they perform, and not just try and trust on their own websites of these crowdfunding platforms, but where there is a uniform metrics which allows me to compare. And the standard thing you want to know is how many defaults did they have, what volume do they have, how long have they been in business, etc. And one can think about what are the key informations you would need. And then I think there is a third element which is all relatively simple initially. It's a feedback loop. So if you have experience, a good one, you do your thumbs up, but you also should have a possibility in saying, look, you guys, I'm not satisfied with whatever, either the outcome or how it was handled or to high interest rates, what these guys are charging. And mostly my concern is to pick the rotten apples very early on, because my concern is if there are one or two rotten apples of crowdfunding platforms, of people who are basically fraudulent, trying to abuse here their enthusiasm for supporting clean energy or whatever in developing countries, and the word gets around, hey, this is all just fraud, it will ruin a whole industry for a decade. And so this is why I feel so strongly that we need this portal. I feel that initially, because this is probably how far we get, and I think it's a public good, and it hence I think will start out as a grant funded to get into the gears, demonstrate its value, and then as next steps I see two directions. One is that it actually develops a rating criteria and sort of takes on the responsibility of saying, using our criteria, this is great, this is less, this is our recommendation. I honestly feel at this stage I wouldn't feel confident A, to have enough information on the crowdfunding platform, nor to have the criteria clear enough. And the second direction where we can take it then is, once it's proven its value to the crowdfunding platforms, and we discussed before, one of them would be that it brings traffic, that by people going there, they say, oh, I like that. Boom, go there, keeping track. So that would be one form. Or possibly, which is more difficult to measure, that it simply creates awareness because people go there and it basically then occurs to them, that you then can put it on a for-fee basis. No, actually not for fee, but just as a contribution that the industry itself maintains it. My main concern there would be to have independence from the regulated or the rated community, so that any idea or suspicion that because they finance that platform they get better rating is prevented, and that can be done by a blind trust fund, etc.
Great, thank you so much, Conrad. Do you want to respond to
Yes, I think it's fantastic, and I actually think it's really interesting. There are so many different possibilities in terms of the way the business model could evolve moving forward. I wanted to also very briefly mention the other two parts of your proposal. One thing I do want to say about the first part is that if it is predominantly an information platform, then probably the 200,000 that you're looking for is enough money. But as you start getting into some of those other factors which require due diligence, et cetera, you're probably not asking enough money. So maybe I would suggest that you sort of raise your ask for if it's moving in that direction. And then to the risk reduction facility, I think that's a very interesting idea, and it's very important, this idea of reducing risk in this sector. The question that I would ask is whether a risk reduction guarantee is the only or the best way to reduce risk in this sector. Because for me, as an organization that has actually put $100,000 into a crowdfunding platform, what reduced the risk for me in doing that investment, if you like, is that I had the ability to view very clearly the due diligence of that organization on its partners. So in our case, we invested in an organization called melap.org, which would be maybe one of the organizations on your platform. And we know exactly how melap does due diligence on its partners, and we actually do our own due diligence on those organizations. So that is what reduced the risk for me. That doesn't mean that a risk reduction facility would not reduce the risk for someone else, but I think that it would be, my question to you really is, when you ask both investors that are more like me, or or philanthropists, or people who are on the money, the large institutional giving money side, as well as the institutions that would be on the platform, do a demand study basically on what is the best mechanism for reducing risk, because it may not be a risk reduction facility, it may be, but it may be other things which are proxies for the same end goal. And then my third observation is that your mainstreaming goal, I think, is very important. And I think that the way in which you mainstream is by basically proving the business case, which is that each of those institutions on the portal end up performing in a way which is considered optimal either by them as a sector or by institutions on the outside who are investing. And your ability to facilitate that is going to be both through the information that you provide on the platform, as well as by promoting those institutions to investors so that they receive more funding and are able to do the good work that they do. I think that goal is a very important goal, and certainly an important role sort of moving forward. Did you want to add something, Christina?
Yeah, if I can piggyback on that. So as you think about mainstreaming, the question is, who's going to participate in this? And so far, your strategy is focused on particularly like North America, but if you want to mainstream beyond just if crowdfunding become common in developed countries or industrialized countries, think also about the strategies about how to make it more mainstreamed in the economies where you're working. And I think the approaches that you take are probably going to be a little bit different, just because of acceptance and general sort of access to acceptance, knowledge, access to internet, things like that. But I think it is also really critical to have part of the crowd that's funding also come from locally where the project is based, and trying to think through some of the strategies around that as well.
Sorry, you've prompted another thought. We're going to end up having this very interesting discussion amongst ourselves, which is my company does a lot of work with what we call remittances, which are cross-border money transfers, okay? And so here what you do, and many of us actually I think have come from families where our ancestors moved. In my case, my family, my ancestors were in the north of Italy, and they moved to England, and they sent money back home. There are lots of people who were from Ireland and they moved to the US and they sent money back home. So even in our own families we have this. But many people who are living in the diaspora are sending money back home to their own families, and it's very linked. It's very similar. It has a different name, it takes a different face, but even MELAP, for example, targets the Indian diaspora. So what they're doing is they're taking this idea of remittances beyond a family member. Normally you're supporting a cousin or a mother or a sister or whatever. Here you're supporting people you don't know, but they're in your country. You're building your home country up through this initiative. So I think that there are links there which are potentially very, very interesting, and I would certainly love to chat to you more about those possibilities moving forward, but that's sort of building on your idea.
Great, that's a really good discussion. So I want to park that for now, though, and let anybody in the audience ask any questions they might have of any of the three winning organizations or any of the panelists as well. Please.
Yeah, I have a very fundamental question. I'm not a crowdfunder nor am I fundee, at least not yet. So just a really naive question. We talk about crowdfunding. We're talking about loans, gift, or some other remuneration or ownership. So what's the expectation of funder? What is the funder get out of it?
It's a very good question.
You want to answer, since you're setting up a platform that does exactly this.
Okay. Beautiful. You are the perfect user of the portal which I'm proposing, because the fact is that you find crowdfunding with all of those modalities you mentioned. The more traditional donation, which frankly is nothing terribly new because this is sort of the button on WWF, please donate. Then there is one category called rewards. If you give me $10 to produce my next CD, you will be the first one to be able to download it. No financial return, but in kind, that's called reward. And then is the one I'm actually talking most about, which is debt financing. So I lend money, I get it back, and we can play with the conditions, interest or not, the maturity, etc. And then there's a very interesting new frontier, which is equity, where I actually invest. I become a crowd venture capitalist. And so there are many more complexities involved because typically it's for longer term. So I want to actually know more information than the quick crowdfunding platform often provides. Trust becomes even more important. So what I would like to do with that portal is to give you an overview of the range of products, so to speak, and then who is offering those with a certain quality.
And if I can just add one thing, the other thing that I think is a little bit unclear sometimes is that on the receiving side, you invest in different things. So for example, you can invest in an individual who started a Kickstarter campaign to, you know, start a face painting business, say. Or you can invest in an institution, in a microfinance institution, which has a set of value propositions where you know what that organization does is financing in clean energy, in clean water, in education, or whatever. But you're investing in an institution which is your channel to the end user. So you have to know when you're, if you want it to be a person to a person, that's one kind of crowdfunding. But if you want it to be a person to a person with an intermediary that's going to channel along a set of values, that's a different, it's less direct. You have to know that on the sending side that it's less direct, but it's probably going to have, that is actually less risky at the end of the day.
Exactly.
Because someone else has done some due diligence to choose that partner organization. Absolutely. Right? If that helps. I don't know if that helps.
So if there is an intermediary, an individual to a group got to be some ownership or something that intermediate.
Okay. So you are speaking now of the final end borrower, correct? The group on the ground?
I think he means like the microfinance organization.
Okay.
How does the microfinance organization cover its costs?
So let's look at the sort of the different steps in the value chain. The example which I provided there is you, let's say, as the future crowd lender, funder. Then there is a crowdfunding platform, Kiva.org. Then there's a microfinance institution doing the due diligence, and there's Pedro Luis also on the ground. So and I think your question is, what does the crowdfunding platform get out of it? That could be a for-profit, like Sun Funders. They will charge to those whom they finance an interest and a finder's fee for mobilizing capital. Or they could be non-profit, like in the case of Kiva.org, which actually does not charge a commission. They live on a voluntary donation which you give as a funder. Each time you put your $100, they suggest, and you can reject it or not. And it seems to work sufficiently that they cover most of their costs this way. Interesting from the perspective of the microfinance institution, there, whatever in Colombia, where it is, for them, they face several ways of refinancing themselves. And one is they have a rich sugar daddy which gives them grants. Typically that's a small share, or they have a big endowment sometimes, or they go to a commercial bank to refinance. And what in this case Kiva is providing is an interest-free and risk-free source of financing. So one of their strategies sometimes is they put their more risky clients, for example, they go into a new business, new area, new clients, onto that Kiva platform, because then if it fails, it's not on their books, while more regular clients, they would probably pick up themselves.
So this is a great conversation around crowdfunding, but I want to make sure that we get some other questions in for our other panelists as well. Does anybody have any other questions for either Peter or Jay?
Peter, I want to commend you on the work you're doing. Unfortunately, what you're suggesting impinges directly on some of the expertise I have, so I want to offer some advice. The technology that you developed to extract energy from a moving channel of water, pursue that. I think if you can do that, and you can do that at a useful kilowatts per dollar standpoint, you have a winning idea. The concepts you conveyed on the idea of the incremental steps of cascading water, those ideas are flawed. I'm not going to go into it now, but I'll be happy to talk with you offline. That water that goes over those small dams is lost. The energy in that kinetic energy is lost forever. You cannot extract it after 10 steps. If you want to extract the energy from a 3-meter dam, you need to tap that energy in a way, you would need 20 of your devices. The reason why people are going to in-stream hydro is to eliminate the impoundment, to eliminate the dam, and to allow fish and other elements of the ecosystem to pass up and down freely. You're suggesting you build a dam. Essentially what you're putting into the fish ladder, and then you occasionally extract energy from that fish ladder. You will not beat the idea of conventional hydroelectric system. You will not beat that. But you have an idea that is potentially ecologically friendly. You just need to focus in on what elements of it make sense and what elements are going to really turn on an educated audience, because I saw things in your presentation that are simply not true.
The University of Stellenbosch, back home in South Africa, had the same reservations as what you had, and we actually built a model and had the water flowing down in the way. It's very confusing the way that you saw it on the animation process. But I can take you through it, in a different way, and you can see it does actually work on it, and we've put together a whole sort of testing cycle of that, and just on Friday before I left, I signed a contractual arrangement with them to actually sort of test this whole process on it. The way that gravity works, it's not a well understood concept. So we can talk about that also here.
Great, thanks. That sounds like a conversation for after the panel. Does anybody have any other questions for any other panelists?
I mean, I wonder if there are opportunities to. I mean, it sounds as though there are aggregators who are facing more to the recipients of the loans. And so, there's you were mentioning that there are people who, in the business, sort of facing toward that. I'm not an expert on, but I wonder if there are people who are doing the aggregation on the lender side more, so that you could, as part of your 401k plan, say, I want to invest in the fund that is funding these enterprises in the developing world, and the double bottom line, or is the business not mature enough for that yet? And then maybe they're out there and they're just not showing up. And so if they are out there, I'll talk to the people at the MIT benefits office and tell them what even our investment options for 401ks. But I just was sort of interested. It sounds as though there's an ecosystem of aggregators, to kind of face the borrowers. Are there aggregators to face the lenders and aggregate it and have a fund that you can say, I'll put some money in? So it's not just like $100 here and there at Kiva.
So, I actually thought you were going to ask a different question, which was, I thought you were going to ask, is there a business, is there an industry that's developing around helping to prep companies to attract the funding? So, that's where I thought you were going to go. So how do you market yourself on the...
Well, that's a good question too.
Which is, and so the answer to that is there is. And what's fascinating, having met, we actually know a number of companies that have hired people to help them develop the video, which goes on Kickstarter or whatever it is, to attract the funds. And what's very interesting is talking to each of them about, whether those marketing companies are charlatans or not, and it's not so much that the marketing companies are charlatans. What they ended up finding out was that it really depended on what you were asking for. Basically, the people who wanted the smallest amount of money, my sort of finger in the air analysis was pretty much anything under $5,000 was super happy. And anyone who wanted more than that, so we had one company that we knew that after the earthquake in Haiti had its clean cook stove factory destroyed, and they wanted to build a new factory, and so they decided they were going to do a Kickstarter campaign, and they wanted to raise $100,000, and they were really unhappy because they couldn't raise more than $5,000. Whereas the young woman who wanted $2,000 to, hire an intern to do blah 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 was really happy because she ended up getting $2,500. So that's an expectation management thing, and how much you pay those companies that help you develop the video, which goes to the heartstrings of the people that make them actually give the money. That's a whole industry in and of itself. In terms of the investment in the Kivas and the MELAPs and the Sun Funders, etc., and whether I wouldn't say that there's an industry yet there, but Kiva certainly has been very successful in attracting institutional investment, not just individual tiny $100 here and there. MELAP also has what I would call a bifurcated strategy, where it's trying to tap people in the diaspora because it's specifically focused on India, microfinance organizations in India and microfinance organizations in specific sectors. So it's a very, very clear channel. And what it's done is it has this set of corporate investors as well who are doing things like the work that we're doing, which is helping them to smooth the way the money comes in. So we gave them $100,000, which they can use to match. Our conditionality is that they have to at least lend 100,000. So they have to match our 100,000, if you like. We've made it very non-complicated for them from that point of view, and they have to report their results. So how many people have they reached, etc., to us. So they have that kind of funding mechanism, but they've done some very creative things. They have one platform that they're associated with where every time you, it's like a commercial platform, every time you buy whatever, I'm making this up, a coffee maker, you have the opportunity to donate $1 or 50, it's more like 50 rupees to MELAP. So they've kind of managed to get themselves into that little, prime advertising space. And the other thing that they've done is they've done a lot of, there are corporate team building exercises where they will go in. So the corporation, it will be, Coca-Cola in India. The corporation is trying to build cohesiveness amongst team members. And what they'll do is one of the exercises is they'll choose a MELAP member and they'll pool some money and they'll invest in the MELAP member together, and they've done it as a team and they've chosen the MELAP member together, and it creates this feeling. And then some of those people go on to become what they call MELAP champions, where they pull their circle of friends in to do on lending. And I think many of these organizations have very interesting, quite fascinating, they tap people who run marathons. You can run a marathon and get all your friends to support you, and then that money goes in. Or if you're getting married, you ask, I don't want gifts, just give them to MELAP. Or I'm having my 25th birthday, all that money, please don't give me a present, just give it to MELAP. Those kinds of campaigns, they've been very successful at channeling funding that way. I don't know if that answers your question.
The one thing I would say too is just that some of the more successful crowdfunders like Solar Mosaic and Sun Funder are now creating what they call solar notes. And those are notes that are meant to be placed in institutional investments. And that's how you tap into it.
Yeah.
And just want to say thank you for your question, because I think it goes to the third component of this proposal, which sort of I call mainstreaming. And so Nicola gave a couple of examples where you mainstream by getting somewhere into the daily business, drinking your cup of coffee. My sense is one entry point is where people hold and manage their money at their house bank. And the thought, and I would love to get some conversation here going in terms of how you would frame this. My thought was, if we can get some progressive banks to create a green crowdfunding account, checking account, savings account, which has some configuration that, for example, whenever you have a certain balance on your checking account, or you exceed a certain balance which you feel is comfortable, it siphons it off and invests it in a broader fund, which then puts it into the MyLabs, into the Sun Funders, crowdfunder, which you can sort of specify beforehand. And assuming that fund is large enough that it has so much liquidity that if you then need to get to your liquidity, you can basically draw it like you have a home equity loan, and you can actually draw up and down. My sense is it would do two things. Make it much easier for regular folks, because they would have to think about it once, but not each time, like now with Kira, you have to get in, reinvest, etc., which you may or may not want to do. And thereby, and that's the one piece. And the other one is, I would then bring in probably an interest rate on that fund. Why? Because the microfinance institution, or whoever is lending out there, actually could reduce his margin because I'm assuming some of the risk, all or some of the risk, and pass on that risk premium to the original lender. And so suddenly it becomes a value proposition beyond the do-gooders. The do-gooders, they don't want an interest. But so if I sit there and say, look, optional checking account, how much interest? 0. Savings? So what? Here, I'm offering you something 2%. Now you don't get rich from it, but it makes sense to you. And over and above, you can brag in the evening. You do something good. And I believe, and I would love to have somebody who helps me to do an empirical market study. How big is that crowd out there? My hunch is huge. And when we start to tap it in, my expectation would be that the banks will fall one over each other to have this offer, because the people will migrate there and say, if my bank does not offer that, I go to this other bank. And so that is part of the dynamics. And I think then you get to the aggregation you're speaking about, because then you have a solid source of funding.
Conrad, just to add to that, the company I work for has had a series of conversations with banks, standard lenders, as well as with the World Bank, institutional investors about this topic, because it is something that they're looking at from the green or climate bond angle of thinking through how can you aggregate a lot of small projects together to have the impact that you want to have, as well as from the general sort of debt and equity investment perspective of lots of really small projects. Imagine clustering the 3 projects we've discussed today, clustering those together. That's what, maybe let's say it's a $10 million investment. That's a scale where you're going to begin to attract certain investors, and if you want to have the impact you want to have for a more sustainable future, ultimately you're going to need to find ways to attract also the largest investors as well. So I'd say that conversation is certainly happening right now, and there are several ideas floating, but the ultimate solution or the more ready to implement solutions aren't there yet, and I think that whomever does generate them is going to end up really having some strong leadership opportunities and opening new markets that way.
Absolutely.
So is there any, just to pick it up, because I mean that's, I guess, the idea here of this conference, that are there any entry points where you feel probably that idea adds 1 or 2 additional angles to that conversation, and that we could pursue that conversation with those groups? For example, I would be very interested in finding a pioneer commercial bank which wants to profile itself in that field and would be willing to stick out the neck and say, let's see how this works, and look at it from a business proposition. Is it strong enough to attract new clients? What would we give up? We are happy not to pay any interest on the balance, and so where would the 2% come from? Do we compete with ourselves? Just to get that conversation really going. So I would be very interested to see whether you see there are some entry points, and I would be happy to join and probably support that conversation.
There are some. I mean, there are some multilaterals and bilaterals that are very interested in promoting innovative solutions in this space. So certainly the Inter-American Development Bank, USAID, the Nordic Development Fund, and other Nordic institutions are all very interested as co-partners and may, for example, finance part of a facility. You know, there are also some banks that are particularly European banks, speaking as, I'm both British and American, so I'm speaking with my British hat here, that are very interested in the climate change space and have been for many years. So Triodos Bank from the Netherlands has been very interested in the climate space and created some quite interesting financial instruments early on and was a pioneer in funding wind way before it became popular in other parts of the world. So I think that there are, and actually Deutsche Bank Foundation has just started a new fund which is particularly focused in this area. So I think that the space is moving. My view with any financial institution is what you can't forget is that these are banks and you have to make the business case. So what you need to do is you need to identify very clearly what the risks are. But particularly risks, they're going to want to know what is the due diligence that's being performed, what is going to make these investments viable at the end of the day. They're banks, so while they don't necessarily, like the Deutsche Bank fund, they don't need to make a lot of money, but it's really a problem for them if they lose money. So how have you created a portfolio that's blended where the most risky technology or whatever is offset by something that is less risky? It's got to look attractive as a financial package at the end of the day.
And one thing to add to that is many of the reasons why they haven't aggregated so far is that the cost and time investment of doing the due diligence for many small projects is enormous. Yeah. And that's why they're attracted to these large projects, because they offer scale. So if there's a way in which you can find ways to either minimize the time and investment for due diligence or have a new, innovative, systematic system around that to assure them that would be quite groundbreaking.
The only thing I would say too is look to the early adopters. I don't think you're going to get a commercial bank to be the first institution to do this. Say it again. Look for early adopters. So impact investors. Yeah. I would look at Coastal Impact. I would look at Bamboo Solar Finance. There are emerging funds that are out there that are going to be far more tolerant of risk than traditional institutions. These are kind of the super tankers. You need the speedboats that are going around the super tankers to steer them in the right direction.
Well, or look for development funding, meaning multilaterals, bilaterals, where in effect you're using grant funding to catalyze a new market. Because Bamboo Finance, they view themselves as commercial. You need to be promising them a return, and you need to be able to present a portfolio with a pipeline that at least looks on paper as if it's going to give a return, and not when we're all dead. You know what I mean? A return sometime while most of us are still alive.
That's the goal. Well, we've got about 4 minutes left since we started late. I just wanted to see if there were any last burning questions.
Yeah, on the water flow. Two sort of technical questions. Let's assume you're correct in your words of how magical for energy. Do you really need a dam to do this? Couldn't you just have a trestle that comes out, start at some port up the river, have a low-angle trestle that then has this draw? Would that work? Second of all these waterfalls are going to increase the evaporative water levels. What is the impact to the water that's delivered constrained if you do this versus a conventional dam? Isn't there additional water loss with the water?
Okay, the answer to the first question is most definitely yes. All you're looking for is a way to channel the water so that you can narrow it down a bit, because there's particular ratios that you need, that we worked out between width and depth of water on that. And basically all you need is something that would channel the water up to a certain area, and from there you channel it down, and off it feeds back in. And there's no limit to the ways that you can do that. Okay. The second question was water loss. Yes, it is no. This is also something that has crossed our paths. I've got how to actually measure it, but it's very similar to any other rapid, over the same kind of period. And I'm sure that there will be some water vapor loss on there, but exactly how much I don't know. on that thing. Can I just perhaps comment, if I may, on some of the questions that were raised here and on grant financing? Is that our project, we've done all of it at a financing of 10% on a 100% sort of equity side of that. And with all of that is that we have a repayment of just over 5.5 years. From a hydro point of view, that's about 3 times to 4 times less than standard hydroelectric dams on that thing. So, you know, from that kind of point of view, you're weighing it up on that. If it doesn't work, well, what are the refuse assets, you know, that we've got left? Well, we've got some turbines, we've got some generators, we've got some switchgear, et cetera, and a lot of that can be sold off. On that, in which case you get 50, 70% of your funds back. So kind of like sort of worst case scenario, you're looking at 30 or 40% loss, you know, potentially. But the other side of it is that, well, you know, 10% financing on a kind of sort of small debenture type financing, where it is that you can spread your risk across quite a few different kinds of platforms, and you know, you would put 100,000 in this one and 100,000 that one, or you know, 10,000, whatever it is, and those are kind of sort of the ideal things that I would see that crowd financing could actually sort of, you know, benefit it a lot. Yeah.
Great. Well, I think we'll go ahead and end on that note. We got started a little late, but it's already 4:45 and it's getting dark outside, and I'm sure people need to head home. But thank you so much, everybody, for staying with us through the end of the day, and I think it was a very interesting panel. Looking forward to seeing where things go from here.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
As the representative of the Coca-Cola project in the front, I really want to thank the panelists, the winners of the contest, our Indian guest for attending. I found it very encouraging and heartening to see this conversation happening. This is what we hope to happen with our project, and it wouldn't have happened without all of you contributing and the audience for great questions. So thanks all.
Thank you to you, and thank you for the panel for going with due diligence through our proposal, and I think, frankly, this is probably the greatest value added we can expect from this kind of process, this kind of peer review, and I just hope that out of this, and I will be wrong today and tomorrow, if you have leads in terms of organization, ideas, this is, I think, what I've been coming here for, just to we sort of weave that into probably an existing idea, build it up. So thank you very much, and looking forward to what the next day is bringing.
Thanks to both of you. Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you very much.
In the lobby of the main hall, Credit Auditorium, so there's a reception there. We can invite everyone to join us.
Didn't really have a chance to chat. Would love to.
Thank you.
I've got just the step is not like that.